I'm Janet Dewart-Bell, and I'd like to welcome you to Race, Rights, Righteous Anger, Redemption, and Hope, the Intergenerational Path Forward, presented by LEAD Intergenerational Solutions. LEAD was founded in 2017. Our moderator today is the legendary television anchor and reporter Carol Jenkins. Born in Montgomery, Alabama, she became, in 1970, one of the first African-American anchors at a major television station, WNBC in New York City. Among her many career highlights is an eyewitness report from South Africa on Nelson Mandela's release from prison. She later hosted a daily talk show and is today the host of Black America on CUNY television. With her daughter, Elizabeth Gardner Hines, she co-authored Black Titan, A.G. Gaston, and the Making of a Black Millionaire, the story of her uncle. A.G. Gaston provided critical financial support to the civil rights movement. Carol is co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition.
Well, before Kamala Harris became the first Black woman and the first Indian American woman and person to run for vice president on a major party ticket, a Black woman named Charlotta Bass, you may not have heard that name, who was an activist and a journalist, ran for vice president for the Progressive Party, and that was in 1952. Several others have been party nominees, but let me introduce our panel for today. We want to talk about voting, the women's right to do so, the privilege, and the actual activity of doing it. We have three wonderful guests. Thais Ridgway, Miss New York, United States, is a native of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but's been living in and working in New York City for over 4 years now. She graduated cum laude from the University of Pittsburgh with a dual degree in psychology and sociology and a minor in legal studies. She went on to Howard University School of Law, yay, where she obtained her Juris Doctor degree. She currently works for the New York City Office of Corporation Counsel as an attorney, a trial counsel, where she focuses on civil rights and policy-based litigation in federal and state courts. In 2020, Thais was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the United States Army Reserve, a Judge Advocate General's Corps. Her previous work experience includes legal internships in the Executive Office of the President, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, which is a White House agency, and a legal fellow in the United States House of Representatives, and a legal policy intern in the U.S. Department of State. And believe it or not, she's a very young woman with all of these credentials. She continues to maintain extensive community involvement, including being the division co-chair of the Pre-Law and Law Student Division of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, as well as a member of the executive board of the New York Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. Most notably, in July of 2020, Thais was crowned Miss New York, United States. And with this title, she has had the opportunity to advocate her platform, Raise Your Voice, the fight to end violence against women, domestic violence, teen dating violence, and sexual assault on campuses. Sarah Esteban has a program and strategy associate with the ACLU, a member of the LEAD Board of Directors. And thank you so much, Sarah, for the work that you're doing with us. Sarah Andrea Esteban is a program and strategy associate with the American Civil Liberties Union. She is a project manager for the ACLU's department that focuses on nonprofit management of their 54 affiliate offices nationwide. In the summer of 2020, Sarah graduated summa cum laude with her master's in public administration from Baruch College. Previously, she worked as a paralegal in the ACLU's Women's Rights Project, which we know very well and are very proud of. Some of the significant legal cases she worked on includes the lawsuit against diplomats, I think you'll remember this one, who trafficked in domestic workers, federal challenges to the nuisance ordinances that punish victims of gender-based violence for calling the police, and EEOC cases related to sexual harassment in low-wage jobs, as well as algorithmic sex discrimination. She also served as an advisor to the Legal Operations Council and chair of the union's new member committee. Emigrating from the Philippines as a child inspired her work in DC with the Trafficking Victims Assistance Program and case managing for refugee families and children during the beginning of the travel ban. On Long Island, she was also a young deputy field director for a congressional campaign. And she had hoped to be voting in this election, but her swearing-in ceremony is being held just a few days beyond the November election. So we wish her well for her spirit and that she'll be able to vote in the next election. And our third guest is Tappan Vickery. She's with Headcount. She's a veteran organizer with nearly 2 decades of nonprofit experience, working in civic engagement, environment, and social justice. Tappan started as a Headcount field volunteer with the organization. Tappan manages information and strategic partnerships to support Headcount's national voter information programs, including Headcount's successful voter information hub that prepares over 3 million visitors annually for their upcoming election. Tappan helped develop the Field Voter Registration Campaign partnership for March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. And Tappan lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her family. I want to welcome our guests, our panelists today with extraordinary biographies, talents, and action in the field of voting. Sarah, I want to start with you, a woman of color, an immigrant, a young professional, and want to ask you what you think the most urgent policy matters are facing your community today.
Thank you, Carol. And I just want to say this whole panel is so amazing. So many extraordinary accomplishments, and I'm honored to be speaking today. So I think that the most urgent policy matters facing around women in my community would probably have to start with, it's about pay equity, as well as, there's a lot of employment discrimination still happening. And when I was working as a paralegal in the Women's Rights Project, even most domestic workers are female. And those are the ones that are usually paid much lower. They don't get sick days or vacation days. It's very relevant with the COVID-19 pandemic right now. With regards to being an immigrant and a woman of color, because I came from the Philippines, I think that there's no immigration justice without racial justice. And the things that are going on with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the shootings and everything that's happened, especially with Breonna Taylor, that's a really important policy matter that we need to focus on in our communities. I live in Brooklyn, and we live in such a diverse community that it's definitely at the forefront.
Thais, your wide-ranging experience and exposure to all kinds of seats of power. What are you looking at this election in terms of what's most important?
So in particular, I'm looking at health issues. So there are a number of major cases that are coming before the Supreme Court. And obviously there is a vacancy on our highest court due to the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is one of my sheroes, especially as an attorney. Just her life story and the work that she's done. And as a legal mind, she's done a lot of profound work in this area, in the area of women's rights in particular. So I'm interested to see how our healthcare system will be impacted by that pending litigation. looking at COVID-19, any change to our healthcare system would have a ripple that we'll be feeling for the next 10 years. So I think that is a really critical thing that I'm watching. Also, from a more social family perspective, my platform deals with domestic and teen dating violence. In quarantine, we have seen a rise in domestic violence and violence-related incidents in the home. That could be due to a number of different reasons. I'll state the obvious one. You're spending more time at home. You're spending more time in a confined, closed space. And so domestic violence is on a rise nationally. And so that is something that I'm also looking at. Finally, I'll just wrap this up. The last issue that I am particularly watching is our education system. As we're dealing with the global health pandemic, a lot of schools have switched to a virtual platform. And so evaluating that platform, watching how dynamic our teachers are and how creative they are getting with keeping our youth engaged. That's another big issue that we're watching, not just from the elementary standpoint, but also student loans. I have student loans. Where are we going to go with our interest rates? So public service loan forgiveness. So there's a lot of issues, I think, but those are three that in particular I am watching right now.
Great. Tappan?
That's such a big question. So with my head count hat on, I will say that the policies and rapid changes that have happened at the state level to affect our election and to disenfranchise voters through uncertainty, watching how, voters having safe access to the polls has become polarized. We had a moment as a country in April when the first CARES Act passed where we could have come together and said, we're going to do the right thing and make sure that we create a pandemic-proof democracy. And that fell apart in a matter of days, and it became a left or right conversation. So I'm incredibly disappointed in the national narrative around that. And I'm also incredibly disappointed in the state policies that have, and lawsuits and plaintiffs that have allowed that narrative to move forward. We are weeks away from the election, and we have states who are going back and forth on how to vote by mail, whether or not things are going to be legal, and it's very confusing for voters. And so as we move forward, policy decisions at the state level, which, who they get to control our elections, are incredibly important. And I think that, and I know actually there was a study for young voters specifically through Tufts that showed that young voters have more awareness now than they've ever had before about how much local and state government impacts their lives. And so that could actually impact turnout in an incredibly powerful way. And so that's one of the things that I'm watching a lot professionally, because I have to make sure everybody can vote and I get the right information out there, but also personally, because I think it shows a lot of the character of our country and moving forward. As a woman, as an older millennial woman, I will also say that public education is incredibly important to me going into this election at every level, from the local all the way to the highest office. We have seen, as Thais mentioned, the pandemic has put a particular strain on the fact that we're educating children differently. I'm trying to manage 2 kids at home while I am working. I have very little support for that. I have a lot of empathy, but empathy only gets me so far. And so it's been very hard. But that is not our true public education problem. We have a massive underfunding problem. School choice has actually created real issues. Some communities do charter well, most do not. And that has created underfunding in schools and lack of resources that impacts our children. And then when you get to the high school level, the fact that we're not teaching civics in school and we're not engaging high schoolers and preparing them to become voters is really impacting their ability to be educated citizens moving forward. And, if we want to talk about apathy or not apathy, if nobody ever asks you, hey, do you want to become a citizen, in the sense that you actualize all of your rights and you start voting and engaging, you might not do it. We know that 62% of Americans have never been asked to register to vote. And so, that should be happening a lot earlier.
Right. I guess that's such a high number. It's a little surprising to me because everything that seems to be in the air is vote, vote, vote. This election, could mean life or death to so many of us, and in this country. Addressing, Sarah, the young vote that gets a pretty bad reputation for not showing up at the last minute, election after election. Do you believe that young people really get the importance of this election? I know that a lot of people say that the young people don't really get COVID either. They congregate in big numbers. Not that I want to disparage, but I want to be hopeful. And I want you to tell me that, yes, they get it, that this election means almost everything.
I believe that the young people do believe that this election is life or death. I'm in an echo chamber of myself, like with my social media followers and my friends, because I've seen in their stories and in their posts urging other people to vote. But I wonder if they're going to vote themselves too, because sometimes it's all for show, to just repost something, retweet something. And I think that they still are. There's a chance that the people who are more showy about that they're going to vote may not vote. So I think we should hold our friends accountable because within our circles, one-on-one, we know the issues that they care about. And maybe we can, like with the ACLU, we have these things on our website that says, here's how you can get your friends or family to plan out how they're going to vote, meaning this is when you need to know about your voter registration deadline.
People have suggested that not only are you voting by yourself, but you need to take at least 2 or 3 other people in whatever taking means, now that we have the mail-in vote, and many people will be using it. Thais, what's your feeling? What's your feedback from young America? Do they understand the generations that will be impacted by the election coming up?
I think they do. I will say that one of the things that I have seen amongst my friend group, because I do have a lot of friends who are professionals and they work in different organizations, different nonprofit spaces, and they're trying to simplify the process because millennials are very linear minded. They want to tap, swipe, okay, I did it. And so what they're looking for is, what do I need to do and how do I do it? And I know organizations like Headcount, for example, they've put out resources that have simplified it, even one-pagers. And so that it's more so about disseminating the information and making it digestible for the youth. And I have seen a major push, even in my own sorority. They've been doing a social media countdown and encouraging everyone from the national organization down to the itty-bitty chapter. And so every single one of our units is moving as a collective whole to try and spread information, make sure it stays at the forefront of your mind, reminders so that when you're on your news feed, today's the last day. And I've also seen corporate organizations taking some sense of responsibility for that as well. Facebook, if you've gotten those pop-ups and those alerts, did you register yet? And so there's a number of different constant reminders in the virtual space. And so I do think that that's helpful for our young voters who are seeing these issues and want to participate, but may be reluctant to do so without a clear linear path.
Right. So what do you all have to say about women running for office? I know that there are over 130 Black women who are running for public office from Congress on down ballot. Much more interest in participating on that level, which is the Black women's vote has been powerful for many the year, but Black women in political office is sort of a new thing. Thais, tell us a little bit about your response to that. Is that something that's in your future? Do you want to run for office? Do your friends see this as a channel they want to pursue?
So I have always been involved in one way or another in politics. My mom, she actually currently works for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and she's been there for many decades. And so when I was a little baby, I was running around the Pennsylvania state capitol. And so I was raised in this environment where, I would sit in, and watch the bosses come into the office, sit in their chairs. So I've always been inspired by the opportunity to change my community. But I am open to all possibilities. And I think that's important for women in their journey of leadership, is to be open. And I have mentors. I'm always seeking out new mentors to be inspired. So we'll see. But I'm excited and I'm inspired by the women right now.
Great. Tap in. Talk to us a little bit about, is there much discussion of the patriarchy among you and your associates and friends? Is that something that, because my generation, was just full of that talk. For instance, when
I actually have underwear that has "Smash the Patriarchy" written on the front. It's one of my favorite pairs. So I would say yes, absolutely. I am the mother of 2 white boys. And it is my job in life to let them know that they are privileged and help them never use it. Try to help them understand that if they do use their privilege, it's to support someone who doesn't have it. And hopefully they will just do better than my generation, definitely do better than our parents. So for me and my personal group, which is a lot of moms, we have this conversation all the time.
The analysis, some people thought that the problem was Republican, Democrat. And I said, no, this is patriarchy with a woman, up against major patriarchy. Sarah, we have AOC who, has set Congress on fire. What do you think when you see her and the power that she's generated with her squad and her and what she's been able to do in Congress? Does that inspire you or does it frighten you?
I think AOC has invigorated the spirit in young women who are starting to become interested in politics. I see a lot of my friends who just graduated college actually volunteering and for congressional campaigns or going out and canvassing. And I did not even imagine that that's something that they would do. I think that that's the power of having women like AOC and the squad
Right.
actually helping inspire women.
Right. Thais, you mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, the Supreme Court. I believe that Joe Biden has promised to appoint a Black woman should he get the chance to the Supreme Court. Talk to us a little bit about your inspiration. Is it RBG, and what about her that, that puts her so high in your estimation?
For me, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been one of many legal minds that I've really admired over a course of many years. I had the opportunity to hear her speak. And when you see Ruth Bader Ginsburg in person, you would not think that her words were that powerful, but her words and the way she's framed them, they cut like a knife, and they are so impactful. And I admire a woman that has the ability to say little and say it in a gentle voice and feel the impact from my head to my toes. And I think there's a number of women that have very similar stories. I do see opportunity for myself.
Right. That's great. Well, we're coming to the close of our conversation. I hope we can do this again, but I want each of you to sort of look into the future and tell me where you see women using this voting power, using this running power, using the let's crush patriarchy power, where you see us in the future, 2021, and I don't know how far you're looking into the future. Tap in.
I believe that leadership should really be diversified by gender, by race, to the point where it's normal. And so that's what I'm hoping for. And that's what I want to see come out of this next election. And, if you think about where we've come, for example, with marriage equality, where we were 20 years ago and where we are now is a completely different place. Women have been fighting this fight for a very long time, 100 years with the right to vote. We still get our ballots rejected more than men. We still have a lot of issues, and we need to see that fight move forward. And so that's what I see. I want to see not just a little turn, but a big one in the next 5 to 10 years.
Great. Sarah?
I hope to see that young women will continue to be inspired and invigorated to be involved in social justice issues, and that this is not just a moment, this is a movement, continuous, and I hope that they feel empowered and not discouraged by the things that are happening with the riots and anything that any politician, any patriarch has to say, that we feel our power to actually do something about it and never give up hope. And by the way, I actually had a quick picture that I want to share because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a co-founder of the ACLU Women's Rights Project. She's just holding me and a legal fellow's hand, and she has gloves. I didn't know that she wears gloves all the time. And it was just I felt so much power just holding her hand. She's done so much and for so long, and may she rest in peace and power.
Right. Well, she's an inspiration to me, too. We expect great things from you, Sarah, because of that touch. Thais, your look into the future.
I think in 20 years, we will have a seat and we'll fight for more seats at that table for the following 20.
Well, terrific. I don't know, Sarah, Tappan, and Thais, you have given us a look into the future, and the lives that you're living right now in the present are so astonishing. I want to thank you so much for the conversation and for the terrific work you all do. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are pleased to welcome today Julie Fisher-Rao, Director of Narrative and Engagement for the Opportunity Agenda, a social justice communications lab. Julie oversees the organization's strategic framing work, translating communications research and theory into practical messaging strategies for advocates and activists. She works with groups across the country to identify opportunities to build public support for social justice issues and policy. She has over 20 years of experience working with nonprofit groups on strategic communications and media outreach. She holds a BA from Grinnell College and an MA in journalism from the University of Iowa. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Janet.
So I want to get right into the conversation. Why does language matter? The way we speak to and about each other, the way we uphold and promote values.
It does seem like it might be obvious that language matters, but it really does. It's really worth taking note of our language and really thinking it through, because our brains are, really interesting things. And while we might believe that we're very rational beings in the way that we interpret information, there's a lot of research that shows that we're not. We wrap our heads around words in ways that then influence the way we make decisions about things. So when we're out there talking about our various issues, it's really important to be paying attention to the bigger stories and themes and values that are being associated with those words. Because our audiences are not blank slates. They have all these stories, the way that they have heard about our issues, like immigration, for instance. There's some really toxic stories that are already kind of floating through the air, going into people's heads. And so we really need to be careful about the way that we approach the issues so that we're controlling the conversation, bringing the values to the story that we want our audiences to associate with the story, and then hopefully leading them to the solutions that we're advocating for and promoting.
Well, how do you promote values? And I know we're talking about positive values in an era where it seems that values are in free fall.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about a lot is the idea of narrative. So one of our definitions of narrative is this idea of a big story that's rooted in shared values and themes that are familiar to us. And they influence the way that we process information and, most importantly, make decisions. So it's this bigger kind of, there's big themes, there's big values. But in the social justice realm, we're really talking about the narratives that are kind of at the really top level, right? So the kind of 30,000 foot cultural narratives that just really come to people very quickly. So for instance, the David and Goliath narrative is something that's very familiar to many Western cultures, many cultures that for which the Bible is familiar. And it brings together with it a lot of values and a whole storyline without even having to say very much to audiences, right? So you say David and Goliath, you kind of know who the hero is, who the villain is, what the moral of the story is, without really having to go much deeper.
Can you tell us the difference between narrative and messaging?
Sure. So the narrative is that really high level piece. And messaging is really when we get down to more of the like policy level things that we want to do. But you can't just go straight into a message while ignoring the narrative or the values, right? Because if I go straight into talking about, say, DACA, which is a fairly popular policy, actually, if people have just had in their heads that negative narrative, or it's been the most recent one, they're not as likely to hear the message, right? So, but if you're talking about how, we are a country that wants people's contributions and participation, that makes us stronger. We're better when there's different experiences and backgrounds at the table. And so DACA is a really good policy to keep in play. Then, you've led people down a different storyline. And so the messaging is really what you're going to do in the moment. What do you need your audience to do in the moment? And the narrative is really the long, ongoing stories that you draw from when talking about the messaging.
Well, how do you put those together?
A structure that we often recommend is the value, problem, solution, action structure. And that is this idea that you start with values, you bring people in, knowing what the big narratives are, knowing kind of how people's brains are already working about the issue. And then you choose what are the shared values that you share with your audience that are positive, that you really want them to map onto and associate with this issue. And this is important because, again, we don't always make decisions with our rational brains. And it tells the audience, it signals why they should care. It's what's at stake here. And then the problem is the second part of the message, which sometimes we can spend too much time on. Really, the problem is just a way to introduce people to what needs to change, how should we change it, and framing it as a violation of our values. This is the threat to these deeper values. And then the solution, and it's so important to have a solution, especially these days when there's so many problems. Without a solution, making sure that the solution is systemic, it implicates all of us. It's something where we all have a responsibility to change this. We need to hold people accountable and say who needs to change it, but we all have a responsibility in the cases of racial justice, in the cases of human rights. And then finally, what can your audience concretely do about it? Who do they need to pressure? Who do they need to call? What march do they need to show up to? And so on and so forth. And then sorry, go ahead.
And I've heard you speak about, and the Opportunity Agenda speaks about the segmentation of audience from those who are with you, those who are persuadable, and then the non-persuadables.
We use a scale of 1 through 5, the folks who are with us, the persuadable folks, and then the people who are really the opposition. And the thing about the opposition is that trying to move them is probably a waste of those time and resources, because those are the folks that, we just know are usually not in favor of what we're wanting to do. But true persuadables are folks whose minds can be changed, whose behavior can be influenced.
So that's an aspect of hope, that there are some, despite the polarization and really the heightened political situation that we are going through right now, among other things. But there are still some people who you would consider persuadable based on the research and experience.
There are a lot. We just did some recent research where we were able to ask questions that we had asked in 2017, and we were able to re-ask them in 2020. And we found that the persuadables had actually grown. And this was on racial justice issues. So based on some questions we asked, whether or not they thought discrimination happened, whether or not they thought discrimination was a problem, and whether or not they thought government had a role in addressing discrimination. Depending on how they answered those questions, we came up with a base, a persuadable, and an opposition. And the opposition shrunk.
And so what are your final words that you want to leave us with, the kind of language that we should use that would motivate people and to, in particular, motivate ourselves?
Moving forward, the narrative of hope. I don't think anybody wants to stay here, right? This is not our favorite spot to be here in 2020 in the midst of everything that's going on. So people need to hear what could happen next. And they, and it's best if we can think of what could bring us through to something more positive. What are the openings that have happened this year, the conversations that have brought people closer to understandings of our issues? Where can we leverage some kind of hope in a way that both inspires us, as you said, to keep moving forward, and also brings our audiences into understanding the solutions that we want. If you bring people into the conversation like that, they might be able to hear some of your more difficult things about it that you need to talk to them about, which are the problems we face and sometimes the tough solutions that we have to put into place. So, values can be a place to really kind of calm people into a more, a better discussion about these very complicated and kind of scary issues that we're facing here in 2020.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming by to talk to us today, Julie Fisher-Rao of the Opportunity Agenda. So we will continue to use hopeful language and to lead with values.
Thank you, Janet.
We are pleased to present more of our conversation with Ambassador Andrew Young that we began in part 2 of this series, as we further explore his life and times in the continuing struggle for enlightenment and freedom for all. His example of moral leadership is instructive and also inspirational. We are so honored today to have with us one of the great men of our time, Andrew Young, who has a singularly impactful career in causes of advancing justice and of advancing freedom. A close confidant and partner of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ambassador Young was active in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and present at all of the key points in American history, negotiating the Birmingham and Selma, Alabama desegregation agreements, helping to lead the Poor People's Campaign after Dr. King's assassination, being elected congressman, being appointed by President Jimmy Carter as the United States ambassador to the United Nations, and being elected mayor of Atlanta from 1982 to 1990. He also co-chaired the Atlanta for the Olympic Games in 1996, as we all remember. A theologian, Ambassador Young was elected as the 20th president of the National Council of Churches in 2003. His numerous honors include the NAACP's 1970 Spingarn Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1981. Georgia State University has named its School of Policy after him. He is co-chair of Good Works International and a director of the Drum Major Institute. Ambassador Young is married to the former Carolyn Watson. He and his first wife, the late Jean Childs Young, we remember very fondly, have 4 children. He is accessible, he's generous, he's gracious. We thank him for spending some time with us today. Ambassador, thank you so much for this. We have some questions from some young people coming up. I know I said before we started our conversation, if it was okay for me to ask how old you are or to tell it. Would you like me to ask or would you like to tell it because you look fabulous?
No, let's put it this way. I was born with Franklin Roosevelt's presidency in 1932. That makes me 88 now.
Wow.
But it means I've lived through, and I started out early. I was born in a mixed neighborhood, lower working class. I think my parents were the only people in the neighborhood that had finished college. But it was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. The Nazi Party was on the third corner.
Wow.
And I was right in the middle. And
well, it stood you in, good stead. That was an historic beginning, and the fact that
it
you
really
referenced
was, because
to the president is a sign of the way you see the world as well.
Well, it also means that I had my first lessons in white supremacy before I went to kindergarten at 4 years old. That my father explained to me that Nazism is white supremacy. And they were hiling Hitler 50 yards from where I was born. And, and he said, these are sick people, and you don't get angry with sick people. But if you stay cool and calm and think, you can think with anybody. And you don't get mad, you get smart. I was asked to run a voter registration drive and agreed. And this was in 1956. So that was right after Emmett Till and the Montgomery bus boycott. And we saw, we were coming back into town, and there were about 200 people, Klansmen in sheets. I had not studied nonviolence yet, but my wife had. So my approach was that if they come to bother us, that I would have to go out and talk to them. But it would help if she would sit in the window with the rifle. And
it's a good thing to have a partner, right? Good cop, bad cop, so to speak.
That she said no.
Oh, really?
And because she had gone to a little school in Indiana. She was from Alabama. She had grown up with the Klan. She and Coretta King were from the same town. Coretta's house was burned down when she was 15. See, and by the Klan, just because her family was successful. Jean's family lost all of their property when she was about 12, and her family was so devastated that her grandfather committed suicide, and her mother got fired from her job because the superintendent hit on her and she whacked him upside the head with an umbrella. And so she couldn't get a job anywhere in the county. But these were women who, from their childhood, had been fighting racial battles. And her attitude to me was more Christian than anything I'd ever heard before. And she said, I can't point a gun at a human being. I said, damn, woman, that ain't no human. That's a Klansman. That's the Ku Klux Klan. She said, yeah. And you're supposed to be a preacher. I said, what's that got to do with it? She said, everything. If you ever forget that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, you need to quit preaching. And I said, what kind of crazy woman did I marry? And I said, but they will burn down this house and with a baby, and you and all three of us go up and smoke, and that's the end of it. She said, so you preach death, you preach the cross and the resurrection. It might just be our time to bear the cross. Because she would not let me settle on violence or even defensive violence, she made me think, and I finally said, well, I'm going to go talk to the mayor, and told them that I was there and that I'd seen the Klan, that I was having a voter registration drive, and I didn't want the Klan to interfere with anything. And so the plants, the people who own the businesses in town said, look, we don't want any violence here. We will tell the sheriff that he can let the Klan have their meeting on the courthouse steps, but don't let them go into the Black community and harass Black citizens. Now, what she forced me to do was to think. And when I started thinking about it, I said, well, let me see if I can make this government work. And
you did.
But that was the lesson. That lesson that I learned in 1956, I also applied in 1963 when we went to Birmingham. And before we started demonstrating, Dr. King said, Andy, do you know any white people in Birmingham? I said, I don't know. I don't think so. He said, see if you can meet some. And I said, what for? He said, before we start demonstrating, we want to start talking to some of the community leaders to tell them why we're demonstrating, what we're going to do, and what they could do to bring it to an end. And that the way he put it, that we were born Black, they were born white. Can't do anything about that. What we can do something about is that we were born in an unjust relationship. And in order to keep us down, they have to keep one foot down in the gutter to keep us down. And why can't we just stand up together and have a new relationship as brothers? I knew a little bit about the First World War. I wasn't born then, but I knew that they formed the League of Nations, and the League of Nations didn't work because the United States was not a member, I think. And that Franklin Roosevelt knew that also. And so he planned, and the reason I know so much about it is that a lot of his planning was done through Ralph Bunche.
Mm-hmm.
Black man Ralph at the United Nations. Had been a professor at Howard University.
Right.
And he took a leave of absence in 1937 to 1939. And he did a study of all of Africa and the Middle East that really turned out to be the basis for the United Nations. Now, almost nobody talks about that, but that's one of the most important events in the history of the planet, because Ralph Bunche conceived of a world, along with Franklin Roosevelt, a world where people, instead of fighting wars every 15 or 20 years, that they would meet regularly and talk over their differences. And that's what the United Nations was designed to do. Ralph Bunche did most of the writing that defined the rules and regulations and bylaws. Jimmy Carter understood the importance of the United Nations and realized that America could run the world from the United Nations. And that's why he asked me to go there as the ambassador to the United Nations, because I had been with Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King was associated with Ralph Bunche. And he understood the connections from Roosevelt to Bunche to the civil rights movement to a new world order.
Yeah, what about the world that we have now?
If you look at the fires that are blazing, those fires blazing in California didn't just start in California. They were blazing 6 months ago all the way down in Australia. We're on our 20th hurricane right now. And those hurricanes don't start in Florida. They start all the way in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Africa. We don't know what the impact is, but the things that are happening to the world, including the pandemic, are happening because of climate change. And there's no one nation that can control the entire atmosphere. Now, if we can cooperate with the Russians on a space station, and we've been doing that now for 20 years almost, why can't we sit down and talk about how we can reduce the carbon emissions? Dr. King used to say that death is the ultimate democracy. I don't care what color you are, I don't care how rich you are, you're going to die. And you don't have anything to say about when you die, how you die, where you die. Your only choice is what is it you risk your life and give your life for. And so once you decide that voting is worth risking your life, and you overcome, well, he helped us overcome the fear of death. He had decided that what he was doing was worth his life. And so he made us, he would always laugh at death, and he would make us laugh. Looking at my life over these 88 years, you realize that we organized the whole South and changed America. And with Jimmy Carter and Martin Luther King, I helped change the whole world. I mean, we got Nelson Mandela out of jail. We got Zimbabwe independent. We got Namibia independent. We got peace between the Israelis and the Egyptians. We settled a conflict that was 400 years old in the Panama Canal. And when I took over the police force in Atlanta, it was predominantly white. And we just figured if we're going to be an integrated city, we have to have an integrated police force.
And are you pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
I don't use either one of those words. I am faithful. I believe that this world was created in love and with meaning and value. And that whoever created this whole universe had a purpose in mind for everything and everybody. And in fact, that was my religious awakening. I actually ran to the top of a mountain in North Carolina, Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And when I was exhausted and couldn't hardly breathe, and when I opened my eyes and came to and got my breath right, all of the world just looked different. And I didn't see, I didn't see all of the confusion. All I saw was that everything there that I could see, every tree, every cow, every cloud, everything in life has a meaning and a purpose. And whoever created this universe created everything with a purpose. And I came down from that mountain. I said, if everything else in this mountain, in this world has got a purpose, there's a purpose for me too. And all I'm going to do is I'll do the best that I can one day at a time. And I'll let the future take care of itself. We believe in my house that Jesus is the closest expression to what God might be like or would want us to be like. But I couldn't understand Jesus when I was growing up because everybody painted him with white, with blonde hair. But then I read Gandhi, and I learned about Gandhi as the little brown Hindu who read Jesus different than the people had been reading about Jesus and teaching me in Sunday school. And he talked about a revolutionary Jesus whose nonviolent spirit can change the world. And so I found out my Christianity from a Hindu. And I'm always learning about life from everybody, including this virus. This
What
virus.
Is the lesson? What is the lesson you learned from this?
Well, it's that everything on earth has meaning and purpose, and you ignore it at your peril. Life is not about answering problems, it's about facing problems.
Ambassador Young, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your experiences, your wisdom with us, the ways that you came about that wisdom, which are so instructive to all of us. Thank you for, I'll say it, thank you for the contributions that you've made, even though you were just doing it one day at a time and facing problems as opposed to turning your back to them. We really appreciate that example. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for this. It makes another day worthwhile.
On behalf of LEAD Intergenerational Solutions, I would like to thank our program participants in part 3 of Race, Rights, Righteous Anger, Redemption, and Hope, the Intergenerational Path Forward. Please go to the LEAD website, leadintergenerationalsolutions.org, to join the movement to expand democracy through bridge building among all generations. Thank you for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins.
Oh yes, I know. 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 Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes I know.